I was born in 1927. That makes me 87 years old.
Excellent. So in 1927, before you came along, let's talk about where you were living, meaning where your parents were living, of course, because it was before you came along.
Yeah. Yeah, my grandfather came out of Germany to get away from compulsory military training, and he had a farm, about 400 acres on Cedar Lane, which was a dirt road then, in Clarksville. The address was Clarksville, Maryland. And we went to this little one-room school at Elioke, Maryland.
Let's focus on the farm first.
All right, the farm was later, well, they had 8 kids, and 4 of them was boys, and they split the farm up into 100 acres each, made 4 farms out of it. So the boys got a 100-acre farm each, or average of my father's farm was 94 acres.
And that was one of the boys, and let's give him a name.
Benjamin Bassler
Okay.
was my father, yeah.
Okay. So, what did you say, it was 4 boys?
4 boys.
Okay. So those boys got pieces of the farm, but before they got pieces of the farm, they were youngsters living on the farm.
Yeah.
Have you heard much stories about your dad and his early farm life before you were born?
Actually, there was 6 boys. 4 of them was there, and 2 of them left and bought other farms, and the ones that stayed there had to generate money enough so the other boys could buy a farm out wherever they wanted to go.
Okay, so granddad, I don't know what you called him when you were
John Gustav Bassler was my grandfather.
Spell that middle name.
Gustav, maybe. Gustav. If that ain't German, then what is?
That's absolutely. We'll look it up. So John and his 3 brothers are working the farm before you were born?
No, John was the old grandpappy.
Okay.
And the boy's name, his son's was my father, which was Benjamin Frederick Bassler.
Okay. So did Benjamin ever tell you about farm life with his father, what it was like? Did you have any?
Oh yeah, they milked cows and by hand, and cooled it in a cooler and put it in a spring house to keep it cool till they milked again in the morning, and then cooled it and took it out to Cedar Lane, where they took turns picking it up because there was other farmers in the area, and they'd take turns taking it to Baltimore until there was finally a milk truck which came along and did that job.
So how were they taking it to Baltimore before the milk truck? They were using what kind of vehicle?
Oh, buggies and wagons and stuff like that.
That's great. So your dad knew your grandfather, his father, your grandfather, and he was technically one of the farm hands, even though they're kids, they're fathers and sons.
Yeah.
Do you have any idea what a day was like for him? What would he do as an average day?
Milk cows and milk cows and milk cows. And then between milking cows, they would work on the farm with plowing the fields with horses and harrowing the field and planting corn with a corn planter and having the rows as straight as they could get them. And they even planted them with a wire, and they was checkerboarded, and you can cultivate them both ways, because there was morning glories was the problem then, which was a vine which climbed up on the corn and bogged it down. And then when the wind blowed, it would blow it down and all that problem. So they cultivated it crossways to get rid of them morning glory vines, and they would get patches which would get bigger and bigger and thicker and wallow down the corn actually. So that was the reason for checkering it and making it cultivatable 4 ways, both ways rather.
Okay, you said corn out. What other crops were on the farm?
Well, they had corn, wheat, and hay, and barley, and clover, and that sort of thing. And each field was rotated. You didn't put corn behind corn behind corn, as you do later, but they put rotated hay, corn, wheat, and hay, corn, wheat, and hay, to rotate the crop.
Did your grandfather work the farm with farm hands before your dad and his brothers were old enough to help?
Likely, but the farm was pretty rough and tumble and wild when he got there. And he married a girl named Dora Diker, which I think had the farm in the family, but it was sort of rough and tumble and growed up, and old John G. made it into a farm and had these 8 kids. And then they went off in different directions. 4 of them stayed on, split up the farm and stayed there. 2 left of the boys, and then the girls left too.
Gotcha, gotcha. So we're still going to stick with this. Oh, I forgot. So Dora's family moved the farm into your grandfather's hands and ownership?
Yeah.
And that was how big at that time? Do you have any idea?
Probably 400 acres, I'm guessing.
Okay. When your grandfather was working that farm, was there electricity and water?
Oh no, that was years later. I was probably 15 years old before we got electric. I was during the Roosevelt PWA days when people that didn't have no work was put to work to make work. And people came around and dug the telephone electric poles by hand, probably 8 feet deep. And, you know, one man, one hole, and they, you know, was digging holes probably 200 feet apart, always straight in, straight across the land. And then we had electric before that, in the fact that we had a 32-volt generator called a Delco plant with big old batteries sitting down in the basement. And then the 32-volt thing, you'd have to run the generator whenever the lights started getting dim. You'd go down and start the generator, put gas and oil in it, and crank it and start it, and then it would run, and had an exhaust pipe sticking out the window. And then the lights would get a little brighter and a little brighter, and you might, after long enough generating, you could make your iron get hot enough to iron clothes even. Well, before that, we put the iron on the stove and had a thing that went over it, and you had about 5 different irons that got hot on the stove, and then you'd use one at a time till they cooled off, and get another and get another one. That's how the ironing was done. And
you said you were about 15 years old when you got electricity.
Yeah.
Was that almost during the war?
During the Depression, when the mom and pop raised 8 kids during the Depression, but we scarcely know there was a depression because we had a big garden and all the corn, wheat, and hay, and cows and pigs and chickens and eggs and pears and plums and peaches and apple orchard and all that sort of thing. So people who had a job and lost it knew there was a depression, but out here on the farm, we scarcely knew there was one actually.
Do you recall German prisoners either at your place or neighbors?
Yeah, German prisoners came in when we filled silo, and they would help cut the corn and lay it on the ground straight as they could, and then other people would come along and pick it up and put it on a low wagon, which was only a foot off the ground with no sides on it, just lay it crossways on there. That thing would get pulled with horses into the silage cutter, which was bloated up in the silo, and the chopping of the corn occurred there, run by an old tractor with a long belt. You had to anchor the silo chopper blower down because it didn't weigh much, and you had to put the belt pretty tight to blow it up, you know, 30, 40, 50 feet high, whatever the silo was.
Do you remember about how many prisoners came at a time?
I think there was about 10 or 12 there, and they would joke with each other and talk in German and talk some of them in English and tease. They had a good time really for the conditions that they was under. There was no forced labor or whipping or another, you know, they worked willingly and got along just like hired people really.
So describe their day from the time they got to your farm until they left in the afternoon or evening.
Cutting corn, lay it on the ground, put it on the wagon, pull it off the wagon, put it in the field chopper. At lunchtime they ate, and then they went back at it till they left in the evening.
What did they eat?
We fed them a big dinner, just like, you know, ate at their own tables and whatever. because they was Germans and we was Germans and we had nothing against each other really.
When your grandfather was doing all that farming and didn't have electricity, also, where was he getting water?
Water was pumped with a up and down handle pump with, down and up and down with a piston plunger down in the well. And it was a dug well laid up with stones. Now, how all that happened without falling down together in a pile, but when you look down in there, it was just round with stones all the way down to the bottom to the water. And a pipe hanging all the way down in there with a sucker and a piston and a plunger and a handle where you go up and down like this. And then you carry water in the house and you have it in buckets with dippers and whatever.
The well was near the house, or the well was near the barn buildings?
Well was near the house and later got plumbing down to the barn, but not at that time. And later they got what they called a ram, which is a thing had 200 or 400 feet of pipe down a hill, which was an elevation of 100 plus feet, plus the height of the heat of the house. And that old ram, which wasn't nothing but a round cast iron bulb, big, a quarter as big as your head, really. And water would come out of a little spring and run downhill, which didn't have gravity no more than probably a 6 or 8 feet fall. And from the water running down that little grade and hitting that plunger, it would drive water up in that bulb, which had air in it, and then the pressure of the air would force a little bit of water into that pipe past a check valve. Meanwhile, more water was coming downhill the ground of the 8-foot grade, which would ram a little bit of water up into under that air and pressurize the air, and then it would push the water up and so on and so on, and it would actually push water up that 200 feet high by the time, 150 feet high by the time it got up in the attic where the tank was, so it could gravity feed down to where we then had spigot type plumbing in the kitchen at least, which was later plumbed around to different other things. And of course there was outhouses, not flushable toilets until maybe that day or later. And everybody had an outhouse and a bucket under the bed or whatever they used.
Were you an outhouse professional, or that was before you were born?
Well, I did outhouse until I was in my teens, really.
Do you remember your grandfather or your father telling how they got water before you had this sophisticated pumping system?
Well, they probably went to the spring down the 100-foot hill and walked up the hill, but I don't know of that. That wasn't. But they had a pond down there that us kids used to skate on, which was called the ice pond, which wasn't very deep, but it had a fair amount of volume on the surface on the top. And they would take their old saws that they cut trees down with, cross-cut saws. They'd take one handle off and they'd saw blocks of ice there whenever there was enough ice there. They'd bring it up the hill on the wagons and put it in the ice house, which was a shed over a hole in the ground. They would put sawdust and then ice and then a little bit of sawdust and then ice. Put sawdust all around the edge, and ice would last in there. The last of it would come out of there probably in June or something. Then later they had a thing called an icy ball, which you would put across a tub, and it would make cold water, and you heat one side and drive the ammonia or whatever was in the thing over to the other side. Then when on the way back, it would make water cool, or maybe even frost on something, maybe an ice cube or so. And then it'd heat it and drive the thing back over to the other side, and then when it came back, it'd make some more ice. I think that's the way it worked.
It had to be ammonia.
Ammonia, whatever's in it. And actually, we had a refrigerator in my day, which was a Cervel Lux or whatever they called the thing, which you put kerosene in it, It burned when it wanted to. It was automatic. It was just like a refrigerator today, except you had to put kerosene in the bottom all the time instead of electric cord. And that was worked until we got electric, and we didn't have no trouble with the thing no time.
Do you remember having ice boxes?
Yeah, the ice box was before that, where you put a block of ice in there and it cools something below itself and all that, or above itself. And it gradually melts, and then the Iceman comes again. And during the summer, we'd ask for 2 blocks of ice instead of 1, and we would freeze ice cream with a old wooden churn and milk and whatever, and make ice cream probably 4 times a year. That was it. That was, you had to crank it by hand naturally, and but we made 2 gallon at a time.
So were they, do you remember any of the names for these things?
The name, like, well, the old refrigerator, I think, was called a Cervelle Deluxe or something. And the other thing, it was, as far as we called it, it was an icy ball. Now, that whether it was the name of the actual thing or not, I'm not sure. And the binders were McCormick Deering, and when we finally got tractors, they was probably before that was Fords and Fergusons and that sort of thing. And
Okay, but before we go there, let's go back to Granddad and talk about how he worked the fields.
yeah, with horses and one bottom plow with 2 wooden handles on it, walk behind.
Did you ever use that?
No, but we, us kids, followed it a lot. That was after there was rideable with wheels on it. When I was a kid, we'd follow it and pick up fishing worms.
Okay, so you had people come in, the Germans came in and helped get the fields prepared. How did your grandfather go about the harvesting process?
Well, the German prisoners was probably only one summer that I know of. Other than that, the boys did it with hired help, maybe, that came out of Tennessee during the Depression. There must have been awful conditions in Tennessee, because a lot of people came out of, boys especially, came out of Tennessee to work on the farm for $1 a day or whatever it was at that time. And they did help my uncles do the farm work. And the girls and my grandmother Dora did the house cooking and whatever. And when the big harvesting came with the filling of the silo and the thrashing of the wheat and barley, then all of them would get together with one thrash machine, and they'd all work at one farm and do that, and move to the other farm and do that, till all three of them worked together, and the other one was more separate.
So if you had the thrashing machines come, then you also had a binder.
Yeah, we had our own binder and our own thrashing machine. It was called a frick.
You had your own.
It was a wooden thrashing machine that pulled around with horses on iron wheels until we finally got tractors that pulled it. And then we cut the tongue off and pulled it with the tractor, because we had to have a tractor to run the thing with a long belt. And we'd pull wagon loads of barley tied up with the binder with a string. And you had a fork. You took each sheaf and put it head first, grain end first, head first into the thrashing machine, and it would go through. And the old tractor, you'd feed it just fast enough so the old tractor wouldn't boil over or whatever. And the straw would go out the other end on a hay stack, on a straw stack.
So Al, when you were doing this with your brothers and your grandfather's brothers,
My grandfather's children, my uncles, did this
yeah,
until
but you were a part of all that as a kid.
yeah.
I mean, that was
But after the farm split up, then three of the brothers did it among each other.
Okay, so that's a good question. We're going to focus on your grandfather was aging. He came across an interesting idea, which then turned out to be what you guys got. But how did that occur? Do you know anything about that experience, what that transition was like?
How they divided up the farm and such?
Well, more like, was your grandfather aging and you didn't want to farm it anymore?
Yeah, aging and couldn't farm it anymore. Or I wasn't there then, and I'm speculating a bit, but they agreed on this line will go through here and that line will go through there, and this will be this section, and you'll get some woods and some fields, and you'll get some woods and some fields, and such things as that. And some of the pieces were bigger than other, but it might have had more wetland or woodland on it or something. My Uncle Al had a right-of-way out through our property, which was, well, when he left Cedar Lane, when he drove off of Cedar Lane, he had 1.5 miles of road to go winding around before he got through our farm and back into part of his farm into the old original farmhouse. My Uncle Al got the old farmhouse and the old farm barn. However, there were a house and barn on the section that my father got, but the section that Uncle Ed got did not have a house on it, and they had sawmill and they cut logs and their own lumber, and Uncle Ed built a house of his own. But back nearer to Cedar Lane, his lane was only 200 feet long, and he was done. It was well drained and almost no maintenance, but good gosh, Uncle Al had 2 miles of road. Of course, we pretty much maintained where we went because we went out the same road after he finally got there. But most of it was old crushed rock that people, the brothers, and Tennessee hired hands cracked up with hammers with handles in them, and old sharp flint stones, which was very hard on tires. And the erosion, you know, there was no side drains. When it rained, where did the water go? Right down where the tracks went and washed out a lot of the old stones, and they was exposed again. And there you go, maintenance again, more rocks again. And that was, well, he had a long lane, yeah.
So eventually every brother got a house on their piece of property.
Yeah, my Uncle George on his section was an old stone house, thick walls, 2 foot thick, and little old windows, 2.5 feet square or something. And then time the women got done hanging curtains over it, why the men would come in and said, "Good gosh, we only got a 2 foot square window, and you hang all them rags over that." Is the way they looked at it. Noise.
You're stretching, George. Hold your hands together. That's good. So let's go back to, so I think we got the situation when you came into life at 1927, was it?
Yeah.
So let me make sure I got this picture in my head. You've got 4 pieces of the farm now.
And we had 94 acres at that
You've got
time.
94 acres. Your dad's got the older house, and then your dad had how many kids again?
8.
8.
Kids.
Now put me in the line where you are.
I'm second.
Okay, so you have a brother or sister older than you.
My brother was named Benjamin, and then Benny, Alfred, Doris, Calvin, Fred, Gertrude, Laura, Johnny.
So Benjamin was junior.
No, one of them was
grandfather.
one was Benjamin Frederick, and one was Benjamin Klein, named after my mother's last name.
Gotcha. What was your mom's first name?
Gertrude Alice Klein, before she married my father and became a Bassler.
Where was your bedroom in that house?
Well, when I was a baby, it was right beside of my mother and father's bed in an old crib, and then when I got bigger, I slept on a old straw tick or something with 2 or 3 others, and then when I got my own bed, it was still with another brother or whatever, and then there was probably 3 in a room because the house we was in had 2 bedrooms, and otherwise you slept downstairs until my father, back probably when I was 12, 14 years old, added on to the house and put we called it the new house and the old house. The old house was actually a log house which had sawmill sawed clapboard on the side of it, horizontal siding, painted and furred out and made into a weatherboarded house rather than a log house. Of course, the log house was in there, Then on the inside of the old log house was furring strips with wood lath, with old horsehair plaster on it, with wallpaper on that, and it was really a wallpapered room after that. And the ceilings was plastered with wood lath also. And when
Two floors and a basement?
old basement with sort of a hole in the ground basement with shelves down there to keep canned goods and stuff like that in it, until my father built what's called the new house, and he dug a basement and poured floors and poured walls, formed up the walls with all of the wood sawed lumber, and then poured it with old cement mixer. We didn't turn it by hand. We had a 32 volt electric motor on it with the old Delco light plant, 32 volt ran. And that old thing would run out there, rattle, till he finally poured that whole darn wall all the way around there and left a lip in it to put the floor joists in, and built a 2-story, 3-bedroom, bathroom upstairs, living room downstairs, spare living rooms, parlor they used to call it, and then a basement with steps going down to the full basement. And he hit stone on the north end of the thing, which was, stone was about 2.5 feet, maybe 3 feet under the ground, tapered off to less than that. And he drilled holes with a hammer by hand, short handle, with a chisel, hit and turn, hit and turn, hit and turn, dip out the powder, hit and turn, dynamite, boom, and blow out some rock, and they'd throw that up on the bank and throw that up on the bank, and they would chisel and insisted, rather than leave that stone down in there, he dug the whole thing out square with dynamite and throwing rock up out of there by hand, and finally made a road over to the chicken house with all that stone, placed each piece by each piece where they belonged, and made a road all the way up to the darn chicken house.
It had to take a day's work, right, Al?
For a day and day and day and days. And he wouldn't give up. He wanted it out and square, and he got it out and square.
Now, I just thought back about the electricity thing. You said there was a generator. So you were generating your own electricity? You weren't getting it from the main road coming back?
That didn't.
At the beginning, and then?
But before electric was around, we had the generator 32 volt. After 110 volt, 220 came, why then we forsake the 32 volt. That was left sit, and we changed over to 110 volt. But that we used 32 volt until that happened.
Tell us more about this generator.
Yeah. Where did it come from?
The generator was called a Delco plant, which started good, single cylinder, had a flywheel, air cooled.
It was gasoline?
Gasoline generator, yeah. We had the gas.
So it was like a hit and miss engine?
No, it was, I think it had a governor throttle on it, which kept it at a certain RPM, because the RPM had to be a certain amount to keep a certain amount of voltage and ohms and all that sort of thing on the line, and the volts. And so the RPM controlled the volts, or one of them things. And it generated a certain amount of amps, which went in batteries. So the generator didn't run the lights and or motor that you was running. It went into these batteries, which it was either full and robust or getting kind of low, and everything started bogging down. And when that happened, you'd run the generator some more. Of course, if you knew you were going to use the electric motor on the cement mixer, you would generate them up good during the night so that your motor would run all day and wouldn't slow down.
Do you have an idea where this electric system came from?
It was called a Delco plant, so...
I mean, did it come from Sears or Ward's? Or
yeah, well, Ward's was the store of choice, but it was way in Baltimore on Monroe Street, and that was quite of well, it wasn't quite too much of a ride in 1934 when we had the 34 Dodge, a used car. But before that, what they had before that, I was too young to know, but I never knew of horse and buggy that I rode in, but we rode in old wooden wheeled cars and or trucks and such as that. And they had wooden wheels and band brakes, and before that they had gear shifts that had worked with levers, and you steered them with pedals. And I hear of that, but I never rode in one of them.
So you kind of vividly remember this electric system, but not how it got there, or where it was from, or?
Not where they bought it and trucked it in from. Probably bought it used, really, at some sale.
So I've never even heard of that system.
You never heard of a Delco plant?
I've heard of the Delco plant. They made the batteries, Delco batteries.
Yeah, but that's not a plant. That's not a system.
Yeah.
Probably. They made the batteries and they looked for somebody to design the other part because they could sell them a load of batteries.
That's
right?
during your time.
I'm only 7 years younger than you.
Yeah, well, Junior Frank's probably got a mess of them, don't he? Don't you all have them here that you run old Delco plants here? There's a lot of old single cylinder horizontal motors that you run here, but Delco plants, they're really reliable. They run good, start good. And
You saw this and you experienced this?
this Delco plant?
No, the system, the electric system using the Delco design, that was something you saw, or that's something you heard about?
Yeah, that was ours when I was clear up until I was 15 years old, guessing. But then was when the WPA with the during the Depression came in and dug the post holes by hand and put in the electric poles and electric lines, and then we had electric off of the road. But before that, anybody that had electric was 32 volt or 16 volt or whatever they had.
And it was run by a Delco plant.
Yeah,
Okay.
which was a single cylinder engine running a generator, and it was all one unit. The generator was right on the crankshaft of the one cylinder motor.
And the motor was running by gasoline?
Yeah.
And what road was that? The poles were up on what road? You didn't
It came in Cedar Lane, then it came back across our fields and went through our farm, over our farm, I guess you call it, and all the way back to my Uncle Al. And then Uncle Ed's line would be closer, and Uncle George's line was medium. He came off of Cedar Lane from further down Cedar Lane, another, not mile, but half mile down Cedar Lane. Then his wires came in down there, and they went all around over that area of Howard County and maybe the nation, I don't know. You got city people had 110 volt, but out in the farm, it had never had gotten out there. And in order to generate work during the Depression to give people a job, then this was implemented as a project, and they put electric back in the farms, and then the farmers let their generators sit, which became antiques, and I thought maybe there'd be a bunch of them around here, but maybe not. You need to get some Delco generators around here.
Let me see that. Okay, so now you became a farm hand at some point, obviously, right?
Yeah, yeah.
You started to see what when you were little?
When I used to get in the big wood and the little wood, and the little wood means you had to split it up, and that went in the cook stove. Then the big wood, which was knottier and harder to split, whatever would go in the probably 12-inch high and 9-inch wide door of the old heat stove. Well, then that was called the big wood. Well, the big wood stayed out on the porch in a pile, but the little wood was carried in the house in the wood box, which was right near the cook stove. And so it was my job to get the big wood and the little wood, and then somebody else, brothers, did the milking. But we only had 2 or 3 cows at that time on this part of the farm. They had more than that over on the big farm where my grandfather was, but when my father got this farm, he started out with 1 or 2 cows, and my father had milked enough. He said he's not going to do the milking. Us boys did the milking. He never milked no more after he had the boys.
What was the youngest you remember you doing chores in the morning?
Morning and evening. Probably, well, when I don't remember it really, it was I did whatever which they pointed at, but after I started doing the big wood and the little wood was likely, I'll say 10 or 12 and on up in there.
Did you have animals to take care of?
The other boys did animals, and I did the big wood and little wood till I graduated into doing the chickens also.
Tell us about the chickens.
The chickens were in the chicken house naturally, and they was little old 12, 10-foot square buildings that you could drag around on the ground and move them from different spots to avoid diseases each year, while they could run out on a different spot of grass, and then you'd move them again, they'd run out on a different spot of grass till you chicken houses got bigger, and the government put out plans for chicken houses shaped like so-and-so, and then people would build houses, chicken houses bigger. Well, that meant that you had more eggs to take to town, to Baltimore. They went all the way, Uncle Al went all the way to Baltimore every week, every Tuesday. When he'd go to Baltimore, us boys would go over to his farm and do his milking for him, so that when he got home from Baltimore and tired of all the whatever driving and selling eggs to people, then he wouldn't have to come home and do his milking. My father's boys, namely us, would go over and do his milking and have it over with by the time he got home. But he took our eggs to town and sold them for us. So I don't know what kind of a deal they had among each other. I never did learn of that, but we did the milking, and then when we got done milking, by Aunt Helen would have supper ready, and we'd go in and have supper and blah, blah, and ha-ha. And then we'd go out in Uncle Al's truck and put the egg fillers, which was in 30 dozen cases. And he was kind of the best he did, I guess, but them old things would get kind of tore up. And we'd have a thing on whether Aunt Helen got to the good stuff before we did. And whoever got to whatever was kind of roughed up had to put the pieces back together. Then all the eggs would go back in these old crates, and he'd go back to Baltimore and run his route and sell the eggs. And if he had any left over, he would sell them to a market called Freed's Market way down in Lexington Market. So that's how far down in Baltimore he got before he started coming home in that old, I guess it wasn't a pickup, it was a truck with pretty big tires on it. I'll say 20-inch and 6-inch through tire, 20 by 6 or something. He used to pump the darn tires up tight as they wasn't much better than iron wheels, really. But he didn't break the sidewalls in them because they never run low.
So let me see if I got this out. I'm trying to picture now, it sounds like a pretty big chicken operation.
Yeah, after we got going.
We're not talking about just Dad's farm. We're talking about Dad and his brothers all collectively doing a chicken operation?
No, each one, after they divided up the farm into 4 farms, then each one did what they wanted to do. And Uncle George did this milk. He didn't go into chickens. He had few geese running around or something. But then my Uncle Ed had more of truck farmings, like tomatoes and beans and stuff like that. And then he had cows, but only a few, like milk for himself. But his main thing really was corn and wheat enough to feed the pigs with a grain grinder and that sort of thing, and he was big into pigs. And then Uncle Al, who had the home farm, had the dairy operation, which was already in place with all the boys that lived there. And then he kept the whole cow thing that was going, and they shared the binder. The binder went from farm to farm that bound up the grain in sheaves, and the thrashing machine stayed in a shed on Uncle Al's place, but it went to all 3 farms. Uncle Ed didn't need it because he was into more vegetation and pigs. And then there was another operation filling the silo. The silo filler was used by all of them too. Before they had the silos, I assume they cut the corn by hand and put it in shocks to dry it. Then they came and push them shocks over and shuck out the corn by hand and haul the corn into the corn crib, and the fodder got bundled up and set back up in another pack, or not shock, but it was a big pile really, vertical so it wouldn't rot. And then that got hauled in and laid out around in the barnyard, and the cows would go out there and eat the leaves off of it and the top tender ends out of it. The rest of the old tough part of the corn would just lay there and become bedding for the cows, and they would walk through it, sometimes up to their knees if it didn't rain and rot enough. Well, it would get kind of dried and hard, and the cows and pigs would walk through it like old canes, really, which was what it was. But when it rained and they walked on it more, it would get tramped all down and become wet and walked in with the manure. But man, was that stuff hard to haul out of there and put in a manure spreader and spread on the fields, because it was like thatch in there, and you'd stick your darn fork in there and pull up on it and nothing would happen practically.
The thrashing machine, was it used by any other farmers besides your family?
No, the three people of the family used it. Uncle George.
Didn't go anywhere else?
Uncle George and Uncle Al and my father. Yeah, nowhere else. Yeah, it had iron wheels on it, which would have went up and down the road, but there was other people that did the custom thrashing, which went around, and therefore we didn't go around, they did.
When you were little, before you got in your teens, I imagine at some point your dad wanted you to get a good education.
Oh yeah, they wanted me to, but I didn't want to. Man, I was a problem going to school. They would
Tell me.
they would take, the parents would take kids. After you got out on Cedar Lane, the parents would take turns hauling the kids to school. But I, for some reason, did not want to go to school. They would put me in the old 34 Dodge and head for the Cedar Lane, and I'd be out the back window or back door or whatever it was, bawling my head off probably, and then get me out to Cedar Lane, get me in a neighbor's car, then I'd go on to school. But I was fussing all the way when my parents drove to school, and me and school didn't get along, and I guess from that reason got kind of a late start. I didn't like school, so I picked my subject. I liked, agriculture, which was scarcely taught. We learned that at home, really. But arithmetic I did all right in, and English I didn't figure I had any need for, because I figured I spoke the language, but actually I scarcely speak the language now, not knowing. But when English came along and the people would get up and say, this is a noun and this is a verb, and it takes the object of the preposition to be and all, man, I was lost there. I'll just get up and say something that rhymed with whatever the last guy said, and it wasn't near ways right.
That was great. Tell us how long a ride it was to school, and where was the school?
The school was, go out to Cedar Lane first, and then drive 2 miles to 108, and a mile and a half down on 108, and there was Ely Oak School, which was a one-room school, 5 grades in it, 30 pupils probably, 5 people in the 5th grade, blackboard on both ends of the schoolroom, back in the back and up in the front, and that was the old hard slate blackboards, and up above the blackboard was A, B, C, D, all the way down to Z, in capital letters and in small letters and in cursive, I think we call that nowadays, which was to us ordinary writing. Nowadays, a lot of kids learn to print, and they don't even know cursive.
So how was that school heated?
Old big pot-bellied stove that would take a hunk big as you could lift, or coal, whichever you wanted to burn in it. And then it was sat not in the middle of the room, but not up against the wall either. Either it was in a corner, and it had a stovepipe went up because it had a high ceiling, and then it went horizontal and outside to a chimney. And I guess half as much heat came off of that old stove pipe as did off the stove because of all the heat going up.
Was there any electricity on 108 yet?
Yeah, well, 108 must have had it because we had electric lights in there, all that I ever knew of. We never had a generator in the basement.
Just hadn't gotten back to the farm yet?
No, but we had the coal that they put in that old stove was down in the basement, and you had to get that old funny shaped bucket, which was the coal bucket, which could empty it right into the fire. And then you take the ashes out of the bottom with shake, 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 and take the ashes away and put more coal in. And a little bit of a problem when it was warm enough to let the fire go out and you had to start another one, but not no big deal. And I didn't get into that. It was all done when I got there.
It's a funny shaped bucket. I just put mine away yesterday.
Yeah, coal.
Fireplace.
What do you call it, a coal bucket?
Yeah.
The coal bucket, yeah.
Scoop.
Had a nice handle on it. It wasn't a wire. It was cozy to your hand. It was a flat sort of thing.
Did you make friends at school for those 5 years?
Oh yeah, everybody knew everybody, and the bullies beat up the darlings and whatever else.
I'm not going to ask which side you were on.
Well, it was a guy named Henry Grimes, which was the toughie, and he always liked to rough me up for some reason or another.
So 5 years went past. The school, you couldn't go anymore. It only went to the 5th grade.
Went to the 5th grade, and after that, we actually had a bus that went through Cedar Lane, and the bus went to Ely Oak School while I was in the 4th and 5th grade probably. But then after we got through 5th grade, you had to stay on the bus after some of them got off at Ely Oak, like the 1 to 5s got off at Ely Oak, and then whoever wanted to go past that went up 108 to Clarksville in the old school, which was there near Kendall's hardware store on the opposite side. And
What grades were they?
that might have had 1 through 5, but the other 1 through 5 school stayed in operation down at Ely Oak as well. But after you got up there, you went 6, 7, and 8, and that was high school then.
Did you go to 6, 7, and 8, or you just went back to the farm and said?
I quit in the second year of, I quit in the 7th grade, I guess, and
okay.
went back to work on the farm.
So you had to go all the way over to that other school and you went back on the farm. So here you are quitting in the 2nd grade, and let me hear about what you did on the farm, because you said, the heck with high school, I'm going to. So what was your day like as you returned to the farm then? Did you take on more responsibilities because you didn't have to go to school?
Yeah, we had a tractor by then, which...
Well, let's hear about the first tractor.
The first tractor we had was an old F-20 Farmall with iron wheels and spade lugs on it, which was pointed pieces that poked in the ground so the iron wheel wouldn't slip. And the iron front wheels was close together. That was one of the first narrow wheels. All the other tractors before that was wide front wheels, same width as the back wheels. This was narrow front wheels, which was maneuverable and practically acrobatic according to the old style, because you could lock one wheel and turn right around and go the other way, and had a brake on that wheel. You could hold that wheel and let the other one go around you. But man, them old iron front wheels, you had to hold on to that steering wheel, put your feet up on the back axles and put your hands around that old iron steering wheel like this, and put them right on your knees like that, because if one of them wheels hit a stone and the other one didn't, that thing was ready to turn left right now, or you had to hold it, and usually you hold it and let it slip a little until it gets over the old rock, and then you grip on that. Anyway, if it had a worm gear, that wouldn't have been necessary, but it was all gear drive with a reduction, and therefore it was, but after a while, fortunately, one of the neighbors who was in the sawmill business, who had a lot of trees on his farm, and he took in a sawmill to saw lumber, and he wanted to clear the land for cows to graze on. Well, he had a Farmall F20 and had rubber tires on it, but he didn't want rubber tires on it because these sticks and sawmill and wood stuff would puncture his tires. So he actually traded us our old iron wheels for his rubber tires, and we said, oh, whoopee-doo.
And what was that tractor?
That was still the old F20, but it had rubber on it instead of them iron things. And that,
Front and back?
man, that was a dream to drive after driving that other thing, because them rubber had a lot more forgiveness in it and wouldn't jerk your hands as bad.
Who taught you to drive that first F20?
Probably my father practically pointed at it and said, go. Cranking it was the worst part. It had a crank in the front. And if you didn't hook that little catch called an impulse on the magneto, which retarded the spark, the old thing would kick. And with us old kids, it was right about up at our head and teeth. And be sure to hook the impulse and don't let it kick. And so, yeah, that old thing would go click, 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 click like that. And after it started, it would fly up and the spark would be regular, or what you might call advanced. But yeah, we'd put gas in it. We gradually got to where we had a gas pump on the farm, and the gas man would come and the oil man would come, and we shifted into tractors, and mules became antiques, I guess you might call it. But we had a lot of pigs. We got more into pigs, and we'd sell pigs into the market, not Lexington market, but the livestock market on Wilkins Avenue. And we'd take a load of pigs in and go right from there to Ward's and spend a check on shoes and clothes and hats and whatever was needed. And
What age were you then during that period?
say again?
What age were you during that period?
Well, when they went to Ward's when I was born, I guess. I took control of the pigs after I came out of high school. I came out of 7th grade. Anyway, I took over the pigs and raised more and more pigs and had more automation.
What was the peak?
The peak pigs was probably 20, maybe 30 pigs per year, twice a year type thing. And we used to raise pigs and raise them up nice and fat until the butcher says, we don't want fat, we want pigs that's a certain, when they start getting when their tail starts, when the fat starts pushing over where the root of their tail is, we want them then. We don't want you to put a lot of old fat on them, and then we cut it off, and we don't have much need for fat, although people lubricated their skillets and their pots and pans with lard. So when you slaughtered hogs, you would cook the lard and had lard presses and pressed the lard out, and the rest was left in there. It was called a crackling, which maybe some people made some sort of a use out of it. We probably fed it back to the pigs in a small amounts at a time with their pig feed or whatever.
To make soap out of it.
Make soap out of it or something. Yeah, okay soap.
So that was one of the things when you left the 7th grade and you found yourself in a new animal process.
Yeah, we had apple orchards, peach orchards, plums and pears, and
Still going on.
all that stuff was to be taken care of in the garden. And we cultivated the garden with a one-horse cultivator, which the mule named Queen was wonderful in the garden. You practically didn't need anybody on riding the mule. Although my sister Laura loved to ride the mule. She'd ride the mule and turn it around and go the other way, and turn it around and go the other way. And the cultivator worked good, really, better than holding on to a garden tractor with all the jumping and thumping of hitting stones. And the old cultivator would go along and he'd do one side of the road and you'd back and do the other side of that road, then the other side of the other road and the other side of the other road. And after a while, you was done, and the cultivator was adjustable. You could make it wide or narrow, but it was sort of hard to plant the rows parallel enough that you didn't need to go twice to a row and the stuff was little, and maybe once to a row and the tomatoes started falling right and left. And really you couldn't cultivate no more after the row was pretty much closed up with bean vines tomato vines, pumpkin vines, and whatever else, and you couldn't cultivate after it got a certain stage. And then it was into the harvest of picking and cutting and peeling and cooking and boiling and canning. And my mother used to get on the old one-wired telephone that you crank on the wall and put a battery in, and her and Aunt Helen or Aunt Irma would get on the phone and, oh, I put up 30 quarts of peaches today, and I put up 60 quarts of tomatoes mixed with corn today, and all that sort of thing. And all total, I got 300 quarts of all this and that and whatever down in the basement, because Mom and Pop had 8 kids, and there had to be a lot of quarts somewhere.
Did you have any problem with morning glories in your garden?
Morning glories was not in the garden. That was in spots in the cornfields.
And there were also pea vines. They were a new.
Well, pea vines is a nickname for morning glories, as far as I know. Unless they might be a difference, and I don't know
I
it.
think they're the same.
Same thing, yeah. Uncle George used to call them pea vines, and my father called them morning glories, so they might have been the same thing. Same thing to them.
And my dad used to call the vines on the barbed wire honeysuckers.
Yeah, honeysuckers. Yeah, we called them honeysuckles. They smelled good, really. And they made a good fence. You know, the fence could deteriorate in there almost to nothing, just enough to hold the honeysuckle up. But birds would go in there and hide from the hawks, and it was a good hedgerow, really.
So Al, here you are back to operating. Your dad was in good health when you were a teen,
Yeah.
and so you and him and maybe your brothers worked for quite a few years.
Yeah, after my father got up to where the boys was big enough to run the tractors and do the harvesting and do the plowing, and he let them. He took it fairly. He did a lot of, well, he was a corn shucking dude. When you push over a shock of corn and start shucking corn and throwing the corn ears out in a pile and pulling the fodder up against your knees and then tying it with a string, he was fast enough shucking corn that he could keep an ear of corn in the air all the time.
So, do you remember how old you were when your grandfather passed away?
I could remember it happening, and it happened during the night, and my father got up and was walking around on the floor and looking out the window and walking around, and us old kids gradually woke up enough to know that something was going on, and asked my mother what was going on, and well, Grandpap died and that sort of thing. And
you know what age you were?
I'll say 12 or 15.
Your grandfather was pretty special to you?
Pretty what?
Special to you?
Not much. He was not a loner, but not a grump, but not too approachable. Sort of the boss. And when he comes in, why you don't click your heels, but you do what you're supposed to.
Good description. Good description. So the farm went on, and well, the division took place. The new farms went on. So you're with your dad, and that went on for quite a while.
Oh yeah, that went on till I was 26 years old, and when I got married, and I guess there was too many boys on the farm that there wasn't enough income to keep all the boys on the farm. So my father got me a job with Charlie Miller, which was not exactly a friend of my father's, but at least he knew him. And Charlie Miller was Charlie Miller Chevrolet dealership in Ellicott City. So he took me down to Charlie Miller, and I had an interview, and got hired to run the parts and sedan delivery, go to Baltimore, pick up the parts, bring them out to the parts department, and put them in the parts department.
That was your first out of the farm job?
That was my first off of the farm job, yeah.
Were your other brothers doing something at the same time?
Your other brothers doing things?
Yeah, well, the other brothers stayed on the farm and did the chickens and well, by then, let's see, yeah, they did the farm work and they stayed on the farm and did the pigs and chickens and orchards and beans and whatever.
I was just gonna tell Phil that we interviewed Paul Miller in his office. Charlie Miller was his dad. And still in the Chevrolet.
Yeah, Miller Brothers it is now. Yeah.
So
They're
Al,
cousins.
was that ever a problem to you? The fact that Dad's sending me down here for a job and my brothers are out here working the farm still? I mean, were
No.
you comfortable with that? Were you ready in your career to do that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I drove around in the old 34 Dodge, which my father bought used, and that was our we went to the Lutheran church, and after it got to be 8 kids, we'd have park in the parking lot up at the church, and all the whole family would be out there blab blab talking ha ha to all the other people that was there. And, how are you all going to get into that one car? And my father would joke and say, well, we all get in and some of us are standing up and then some of us are able to sit down, the others sit down on top of them or keep on standing up, whichever they want to do.
I want a picture of that.
Yeah, and then my grandmother, my mother's mother, was with us also, so that was 11 people in one 34 Dodge.
I'm sure the Dodge Corporation would enjoy a picture of that.
Yeah, Dodge Brothers, it had on the front. We used to tease the other cars that we don't look out for nobody. We got a sign on the front that says Dodge Brothers.
Was this one of those stretched limousines like Edmund?
No way, this was a old back seat that was made for 2 people.
Remember Edmund Piggy?
Yeah.
He had a long blue Dodge.
Oh yeah, this was not a stretch model. After I worked at Charlie Miller Chevrolet,
While you were there, the farm was still going on. I need
Yeah.
to be clear of that.
yeah, farm.
Okay, now go ahead.
Yeah, during the Depression and the war and all that stuff is when I worked there. And in 48, I guess, is when I left there and went back and took the chicken department and 3,000 chickens, bought Uncle Frank's egg route, which was in Washington, which got, for some reason, got 10 cents more a dozen than Uncle Al did in Baltimore. So I thought, man, if I buy Uncle Frank's egg route and raise my own chickens and clean my own eggs and box my own eggs and deliver my own eggs, that's the way to go. So I bought Uncle Frank's egg route and started out with 100 chickens and went to 200 to 300 and gradually got up to 3,000 and sold eggs in Washington.
Where did those chickens live?
I built
3,000 chickens.
I got them little old chicken houses on runners, which I raised my baby peepees in and heated them with, sometimes we had old coal-fired stoves with their own dampers, and after a while we got electric and we got the chickens, baby peeps could be heated with infrared lights with thermostats which shut themselves off. And man, them chickens knew exactly what to do. They'd go under that thing just like a mother hen. And when they got too warm in the middle, they would just run over top of the other ring of chickens and they'd lay on the outside and pant a little bit. Pretty soon another one would get too warm in the middle. He'd come up and run over top of the pile. The ring would get bigger and bigger and bigger if they got too hot. And the ring would get littler and littler and littler if the weather was cold.
And they recycled.
And they recycled. And the ones underneath was warm because the others was laying on top of them. They'd stick their head up through there and breathe out on top. It was just like a dandelion of white chickens all in a ring.
How much did you get for a chicken in those days?
I didn't raise there was no such thing as a broiler chicken like they raised them up genetically now to where a broiler is a broiler, and a layer is a layer, and a fighter is a fighter, and all that sort of thing. But then we had laying chickens, and we hatched our own. We had an incubator, really. But you hatched roosters and pullets alike. Well, we wanted the pullets for eggs, but the roosters was not valueless, but got sold off when they was full grown. But they was just hogs eating feed as far as we was concerned until they got big enough to take up to my Uncle Ed Miles, who had a chicken slaughtering, selling chickens on his route. He had a route in Washington too. So we would sell our roosters to him, and then we had all pullets after that. Then the pullets laid eggs until they was not laying eggs anymore, which was probably 3, 4, 5 years old, really. When they looked like they wasn't laying eggs, and we had a way of looking at them and telling whether they was laying eggs or not. When they wasn't laying eggs but eating feed, they would go to Baltimore, the Dover Poultry Company, and crates, wooden crates, which would hold hens. They would hold 15, I guess, and to a crate. But they was not in the best condition, old and tough and whatever, and lucky we could sell them for anything. Dover Poultry would sell them for, I assume, soup or something, but we wouldn't get 5 cents a pound, or 2 if the old chicken was bad enough. And hogs was 8 cents a pound, 8 and 12. For live hogs, you know, with the hoof and the hide and the hair and the everything. But there's a lot of work between there and a piece of bacon. And my uncle came onto the idea of why didn't he got into pig business. That was after the farm was divided up in 4 pieces. Uncle Ed went into the pig business big, like I said before, and he would sell them in the livestock market just like we did. But he came onto the idea of why don't he kill pigs on his own farm and butcher his own pigs and sell meat out of a cooler, because by then he had 110 volt and refrigeration became around, and you could build a refrigerator box to walk in and put shelves in. So he bought one of them refrigerators and did that with a refrigerator door that slammed on the outside and killed pigs. And he thought, well, heck, I'll just grind the whole thing up into sausage. But he lived back in Cedar Lane, and nobody came to buy the sausage, and he had to sell it wholesale to somebody else, and it really never took off. And the refrigerator box sat in his yard, and he went back to selling them on the hoof again.
How long did your chicken business last?
Probably clear up to from probably 30 years or so. Probably was 22 years old when I started the chickens with the 100, 200, 300, and by the time I got up to the 3,000, it was probably 10 years or so later, and then I had the 3,000 operation clear up till 1968 or something, when the Rouse Company was buying our farm, and we traded that farm for another farm they owned on Shepherd Lane. We traded 74 acres down in the middle of what is now Columbia for 500 acres up on Shepherd Lane, 5 miles away. We was interviewed to buy or trade for other farms further out, more land, but we chose this 500-acre farm because we figured if they're going to build a new city there, we would have the ripple effect of appreciation, and we would someday sell lots for houses, which we did in just before the bottom fell out in 2006. The family voted to sell the farm and perked the farm on Shepherd Lane, which was the 500-acre farm, which didn't perk very well because it was 2.5 or 3 miles of streams on the place. It was beautiful, but didn't lay good for perking land and building houses. But meanwhile, I knew that, and Dale Misley and I and others got together, and we wanted to zone the county for transferable development rights. You could develop a farm here near utilities and good roads and sewer and water and stores and stuff, and further out in Howard County, other people could put their farm in forever farming, but get the same prices though they sold it for farmland, and bring them rights down in the county where there was closer to more people, civilization, I'll call that. But the county commissioners at that time wouldn't accept it, so it went dead. But 4 years later, when they elected a new bunch of commissioners, they took the same thing and called it Development Opportunity Exchange, which is in effect right now. But that Development Opportunity Exchange, which was cluster development really, our farm, our group, we implemented that on our Hayland farm, which is 500 acres. Therefore, it had its own sewer plant. It's a shared system that the people that live there, each house that lives there, don't have a septic tank. They have a sewer that goes to the street, which goes into a grinder, which goes through pipes over to the $5 million sewer plant, which when the water comes out of that thing, it's not drinkable, it's good to water lawns or whatever, and that sort of thing, with like golf course water. Well, that water is pumped up on a hill, which perked beautifully. It's a 500 feet above sea level topo. And where they built the houses is 400 feet, which gave beautiful wells, fortunately. And the hill that was 500 perked beautifully for perks. So the big sewer plant pumps water up into the pipes that have holes in them, the whatever you call it, weep, seep, pipe, perk area. And they have 7 different areas. They charge one area a day and let that one dry up, and charge another area another day, and 7 comes around, 7 around again. And that way the water goes back into the same farm that uses the water. And some of them wells gave 60 gallon a minute. Not the average, but one or so did do that. But over on the other half of the farm, on the other side of the stream where the perk system is, we drilled 5 wells to get water to wash their hands in the sewer plant. So it was fortunate the right half of the farm was used for the right thing. But if we hadn't had the Development Opportunity Exchange shared system, we'd have probably only got 20 lots on the whole 500 acres, and they would have had long lanes and long utilities, electric and telephone and cable TV and everything else. But this way, the roads were shortened up and the clustered houses. The houses are on 33,000 square feet, which is only 3/4 of an acre.
What is that called?
Shared system. Development Opportunity Exchange is what the county calls it, or clustered.
And that is there a name for that community that you?
The development name is Walnut Creek.
Okay. So let me go back a tad here, Al. I want to go back to what took you out of the chicken farm business.
Actually, I was in the chicken farm business until Bob Moxley, a realtor, came around knocking and wanted to know if we wanted to sell our place, and we said no, we're farmers. And later they was buying farms nearby. There was a farm that was kind of landlocked off of Cedar Lane that had to go through, or over a one man's field with a right of way or easement. And there was woods back in there. I don't know how many acres, I'll say 20. Sold for $600 an acre. And then they bought some out more for $800 an acre. And then they bought whoever would sell for $1,000 an acre. And it went all over, not all over Howard County, but between 108 and 32 and Route 1 really, and bought up everything that anybody would sell easily. Then they bought up everybody that they could talk it into selling. Then they raised the price and it went up to 1,000 and it went up to 1,200 and it went up to 1,500. And after that, they had pretty much all the people except for a few fill-ins that didn't want to sell. They bought Double H Ranch on Route, well, it's Route 29 now, it was Columbia Road then, which was the big cattle farm, Double H Ranch, where Lake Kittamagundi is now, and the other lake, Wild Lake. They bought that for $3,000 an acre. And from there it went to $5,000 an acre, but we never did sell for money. We traded a farm for a farm, which was no tax involved. You didn't have to bring your gains tax up to date, which was 29% at that time.
So who in the family went to the 500 acre?
After this realtor kept coming around trying to, you better sell or they'll put you over in the pile. They don't want to, they don't want to fool with you. So we said, okay, we're farmers, we're going to stay here. And he thought we was kidding, but we was dumb enough or smart enough, I don't know which. We actually cleaned out the barnyard, hauled dirt in and made it level, and paved the barnyard. And he came and saw us paving the barnyard, and he thought, good gosh, them dummies are going to stay. So then he offered us Hayland Farm for our farm, which was 500 acres for 74 acres.
What was your 74 acres called? Did it ever have a name?
Midway Farm, I guess, but it never was published or named on the mailbox, sort of a farm.
And the 500 was called?
Hayland Farm.
Hayland?
Yeah.
Okay.
And it had had that name for years, really. That was on Shepherd Lane. So we moved off of Cedar Lane onto Shepherd Lane. And
what approximately what was the time period on this?
well, we made the deal in December of 1968. And by the time we got the houses renovated enough to move up there, I moved up there in 1970. Okay. And from then on, I forsook the chicken house down where I was. I rented that out for tenants to live in my house down there, and I moved up to Hayland Farm. But I had to rent a house up there because the family incorporated and owned the farm. So the farm at Shepherd Lane, Hayland Farm, was owned by a family corporation. So each person that wanted to live in a house there had to rent the house because there was people that wasn't there, which was also in the corporation, so that they would have an income off of the farm to pay the taxes, the upkeep, and the whatever, and income less was seldom and any left. It just maintained itself really. And my thought is hold it for appreciation. Living in those small houses was no problem for me, but they was really tenant houses for the big stone house, and the big stone house was not involved. The previous owners had sold it right out of the middle of the farm because they couldn't hold the farm because it was the payments was due. So they sold the big stone house out of the middle. And
so you moved to this farm with these other smaller outside or tenant type buildings, but there was this beautiful stone house that was actually owned by somebody else.
Yeah, up on top of the hill, looking out over everything was the big stone house.
Did you ever get a chance to buy that?
No.
Did you ever want to?
Not positively, because it was too big and rambly for any of us one family to move in, and we didn't want two families in there, which if you had separate interests, separate and all that separate, well, it might work all right, but otherwise it probably wouldn't.
So help me picture this new 500 acre, how many of your family moved on to that?
Well, 4 families moved into the 4 houses,
Okay.
which was renovated up to suit our satisfaction before we traded. So we traded for the farm with the houses renovated condition, ready to move in. We didn't accept the farm as was. We actually added on to some of the houses and put big picture windows in them and shutters and all that sort of thing.
Was your dad and mom still living?
Yeah. Yeah, they lived in one of the houses.
So now tell me about that adventure in terms of what you were all producing.
That was my brother loved to farm, my youngest brother, and he loved cows and tractors and he went into the beef cow business. He didn't go back into the milking cow business. However, there was a barn there that was burnt down though. So there was no barn there. So he went into beef business, which stayed out in the field really, and he raised corn and filled the silos and fed them to silage and that sort of thing. But he had bad luck, I guess you'll call it, in the fact that the previous owner was in the cow buying and selling business, and he would buy old skinny cows, maybe diseased or whatever, from livestock sales, bring them to that farm and dump them out on the pasture, and those who got in good enough condition to go back to market did. But meanwhile, they got a disease on the farm called bovine rhinotracheitis, which killed his beefies when they was about 200, 300, 400 pound, right when they had a lot of investment in them. If they died when they was a day old, you know, so what almost, but to raise them up to that and then they get skinnier and skinnier and waste away and die was put him out of business really. He couldn't maintain the farm and the tractors and everything, so he had to gradually quit farming and just went to well, he got a job with RLO, which is a contractor running bulldozers and excavators and pans and that sort of thing.
And which brother's name was this?
That was Johnny, my youngest brother.
And Fred Bassler is who?
Fred is not next to him. It's 2 girls between him and him, but Fred is older than Johnny. Yeah, Fred is pretty active in this farm heritage group.
So I'm just curious, I mean, that was in the, what are we talking about now, early 70s?
Yeah, 70s when I moved there.
Right, but getting this bovine disease, wasn't there a vet, and wasn't there an inoculation that could treat this?
Yeah, he would call the veterinary, and the veterinary would look at him, and he'd charge him $50 for coming out and saying, "I'm glad they ain't mine."
They were that bad off?
Yeah.
I see.
Do you remember the veterinarians' names at that time?
No, my brother dealt with them and they'd go and come, but Fred Lewis was on the scene, but I don't know which one said what, and I think he had somebody else really, not Fred Lewis.
Yeah, we interviewed him yesterday.
Yeah, well, I think he had somebody, but I forget now, there was something like Blankenship or something like that, but that wasn't his name.
How long did that go on where you were helping the family in farming?
Well, that went on for some years, from 68. We went up there and did the farming during the year of 1969, tended to the farm, growed corn, wheat, and hay, but we gradually got the cows and stuff up there over the period of years, and the silos got silo unloaders and automatic feeders for the cows, but probably when we sold the farm, we haven't sold the farm yet, really. We're selling lots. We stayed in it and sold the lots. We didn't sell the farm to.
But your dad was there until he got older and passed away? Do you
Yeah.
remember that period of time?
That was clear from, he moved up there probably between the year 71 or 2, like that, likely. And I don't know the year he died. Likely it was, I'll say, 85, 1980. Well, he was, oh yeah, he was born in 1901, and he was about 90 or something, no, 80 and something when he died, so whatever that makes it.
87, 88, whatever.
Yeah.
Was your dad kind of a hardhead like your grandfather was?
No, not so much, because us kids was willing workers, and you just point at it and we do it. And he was corn cutting, corn shucking, wheat planting, corn planting dude. And when the pigs need feeding, us kids did it. When the cows need milking, us boys did it, and that sort of thing.
Did some of your kids get interested in farming?
No. My boys had 2 boys. They was named, went to high school, Glenelg High School. And Jeff worked with one of my sister's husband named Arnold Sewell, was in the piano business. And he went there helping him refinish and rework pianos. People would bring in old pianos and they would redo them up like new. So he got kind of good at woodwork and fitting, like people say when they're building a house, hurry up, we're not building a piano. Well, he was building a piano. So when he builds something now, man, if he builds something, you get up and you have to take it apart, you get a bucket full of screws out of it.
Al, when did you realize that you weren't going to stay as a farmer?
Really chickens was quasi-farmer and partly farmer and part marketer, really. So I went on the egg route. So I learned a lot of education from the egg route, because I talked to all kinds of people in all kinds of trades, with lawyers to realtors or whatever, whoever. And that's partly the reason we was able to be educated enough to hold on to the 74-acre farm long enough to get it to be valuable to trade it for 500 acres, because some of the people on the egg route would say, well, if they got oil under it, you got oil. If they got gold under it, you got gold. If they're going to build a development, you're in the middle. So from that, why we kind of, poor old Bob Moxley, he was a realtor. He made $1 million though, because he was the realtor for the Rouse Company, which nobody knew of. He would come back and convince people to sell their farm, and he would get a commission, all them darn farms all over Howard County, and he was their realtor. And when he finally got down to them who didn't particularly want to sell, like us, we looked at farms, 2, 3, 4 farms put together, 1,000 acres, right in Lisbon, which is now the Dr. Hill farm and the Lambert Sissel farm, which was in the Melvin, well, earlier it was the Melvin Wessel farm, and the Fritz farm and the Nils farm. We could have had all 4 of them farms in Lisbon, or Hayland farm, and Kookamuga. Then we'd say, then my brother would, because he was in the milk business, well, we want Fritz's cows and farm machinery. Then when the realtor would come back, well, they'd say, well, now we want Nils's farm across the road. Then they gave up and said, good land, no. And we said, or we'll take Hayland farm. No, you can't have that. Okay. Okay, we agreed to give you a Hayland farm. Now we're in the, Then we incorporated the home farm, and then all that sort of thing took place.
Yeah, that was called Hayland Farm even in 1950, I remember.
Yeah,
There was a sign out.
yeah,
It's a beautiful farm.
yeah.
What was your 74 acres made into?
I see. Beaverbrook, no, Hawthorne Village, and there is a whole lot of doctor offices, and the hospital is on one edge of my uncle's farm, Uncle Ed and my father. The hospital is on our farm line on the north edge. And then from there, all them doctors' offices is on the part where the house was, and those low-rise doctor offices against Cedar Lane. And that Hickory Plaza, two-story, pretty brick, columns around the windows, office building is mine. I built that. My house was on 4 acres there, which was not part of my father's farm. And I had drawings I made my own drawings with parking and where they'd go. I had it zoned for permit for a nursing home. And then that was on the upper half, and we came on, well, wonder if we can get an office building on the lower end of it, and it was only 4 acres. And so I had Joel Abrams for a lawyer, and we went to a hearing to get this office building there. And the board agreed, yeah, we can have the office building there. And then the board that was hearing it said, well, now which one do you want? And my lawyer said, both of them. Well, you didn't show both of them to us in the hearing. You come up the last minute and say, well, here's what it'll look like with both of them on there. Both of them? This ain't a hearing for both of them. This is a hearing for the office building down on the lower end. No, we want both of them. No, it says show the existing and proposed buildings. You get whichever you want. So I said, oh, shucks. So I didn't do nothing until later when I went back in for 50,000 square feet of office building, which I had drawn on this site plan, and took it into there and got approval for the Hickory Plaza office buildings, which is some of the best looking buildings in Columbia. I'm proud to say and sorry to say, because we had so much money in it per square foot, $130 a square foot, when the Rouse Company was building them right and left for $90 a square foot. So we had to get top-notch rent to break even. But worse than that, we built them in 1989, and when we drove the last nail in that place, it poked a hole in the economy and it all ran out, and we came into the 1991, 2, 3, 4 depression, which wasn't as bad as the 08 one, but it was, we had to feed that thing to the tune of millions.
Wow. I understand, Al, that you might have had some interest in the aviation field?
Yeah, well, when we had
How did that start?
we had a cow pasture there, which was 12 acres, with a rectangular shape, which gave us 1,000 feet one direction maybe. And I had a friend we had the 10 or 12 cows and 3 mules in there. And a friend of mine named Henry Whalen was in the Civil Air Patrol, which would give you an airplane if you would maintain it, cover it, fix it up, which, was more valuable, Anyway, he had this old J3 Cub, and he would try to park it at different places. He took it down to McCarthy's place down near Elkridge somewhere there, which was a friend of his. Later on, we was flying around, went down to Glen Burnie to Ed Whipp's airport, and there was an airplane sitting there, said, for sale, 450. I said, is that 4,500 or 450? And Henry Whalen says, 450. I said, I could buy that thing. So I bought it, and he flew it home for me. And I put it in I put it at the airport because I had to take flying lessons. So I soloed in 8 hours because I'd been flying with him. And so the instructor didn't tell me, now, you got to go up and just fly around and around in the pattern and come back here and land. I lit off for my cow pasture, and they didn't know where the heck I was.
You said you put it at the airport. What airport?
The Rutherford, which is now closed and has a GM warehouse on it, I think, on Windsor Mill Road.
Gas and electric company.
Gas and electric company or something is there now, yeah. Anyway, I left the pattern. He didn't say don't leave the pattern. So I went back to the cow pasture and put it in the cow pasture, and here I come back with somebody to get my car and says, I got it over in the cow pasture. They both had a fit.
Probably weren't supposed to be hauling passengers either.
Man, I took more passengers for a ride when I didn't have a license than I did after I got my license. Man, people would hang around there on Sunday, and I'd give a ride.
So who's the man you rode in the plane first with?
Henry Whalen.
Well, okay.
He's still living.
Okay. That's quite an interesting story. I don't know what else to ask you about your farming life. Let's see.
Well, we gradually got up to 5 airplanes, because when you got a place to put airplanes, you got automatic friends that's got airplanes. So we gradually got up to family cruisers and Luscombs and Cessna 172 and stuff like that. Well, then Uncle Ed had moved to Minnesota because he had his daughter married a man from Minnesota, and he loved Minnesota. The corn was prettier out there or something. So he moved to Minnesota, so we rented his farm, which was north of our farm, which had a field that was 1,800 feet long probably. Wires on one end and woods on the other though. So we rented that for cow pasture, which automatically became the runway, because we went out of the 1,200 foot one into the 1,800 foot one. And then when I bought my old PT-22 Ryan, which was a trainer that the Air Force used to train pilots before they let them loose in a P-51. So that was a acrobatic type airplane, too tough to break up in the air, so to speak. Had big old guy wires on it and open cockpit and radial engine, and we had a lot of fun in it, but it was, you got to do it right. It's more tricky than the other airplanes, which it was made to be because it was training for a P-51. And we took movies in that old thing from the inside of itself with doing spins and loops and slow rolls. But there was a lot of climbing. It was a slow climber and a fast loser. When you do a loop and another loop and a slow roll out of that and a snap roll out of that, and man, you're down close enough to the ground that you ought to be climbing again.
You mentioned 2 planes. How many have you owned in your life?
Let's see, I had a J4 Cub, which is like a J3 Cub, except it's side by side, which is a whole lot more, you know, you can talk to each other better, and right side by side, you can teach each other better. But the old J3 people used to tease me because the old thing was fat and wide. Yeah, it's got that old built-in piano. They would, anyway, I had that J4, and then I got the Ryan PT-22, but I really wanted the clip-wing Cub, which was faster climber and much more acrobatic. But Arch Eccleston had bought that. It was over at Essex Sky Park in Baltimore. Well, I bought the PT-22 Ryan because he had bought the clip wing, which I wanted. So we did that for a year or so, and then he wanted to sell the clip wing Cub. So I went over to Essex and bought the clip wing. So now I got the clip wing and the Ryan, but meanwhile I had at least sold the J3-4. So now I had the Rhine and the clip wing. So later on I sold the Rhine and started doing the air shows, sometimes for money actually. I had a smoke, yeah.
Flew in air shows?
Yeah. Yeah.
Tell me about one of the thrilling air shows.
Yeah, I went to Aqualand, which was down to Potomac River Bridge on, I guess, where 301 crosses the river. Is a place down there which did the gambling.
Okay.
And anyway, they had grass one-way down there, and they would have air shows, 1 or 2 a year. And I would go down there and I'd say, I'll fly in your air show and not charge you nothing if you let me. And they would let me fly for last or something. And they had FAA regulators, examiners, whatever they called them there. And they'd say, well, you can fly, but you got to stay above 500 feet. And I'd say, that ain't no air show. That's an airplane flying over in like a transit. If you don't get below that, it's not an air show. Blah, 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 blah. And
It was 500 feet up and 500 feet away from the people.
So he says, after a while he'd say, well, I ain't going to measure it. Oh, okay. So then I'd go do my thing. But I had it worked out to where I had smoke. I had better smoke on that thing than a Stearman with 450 horsepower. Well, I don't want to explain all the pipes and tanks and whatever, but...
Did you ever own a biplane?
No.
Did you ever have interest in having a biplane?
Yeah, but they were, I'm going to say expensive, but, well, they had a radial engine which hogged more gas. And well, my Rhine had a radial engine, really.
Did you fly a Stearman?
I have thrown in a Stearman, well, back seat, yeah.
So actually, the planes that you picked and bought are much better for stunt work than a biplane. Is that true?
No, a 450 Stearman biplane is a good airplane because you can do a few loops and rolls and make a heck of a lot of noise when you when you flatten out that prop and rev up that engine. You can make the windows rattle. So, or not really, but you make a lot. And anyway, that's their air show is noise, largely is but anyway, on Stearmans, yeah, they have wing walkers and they get up on the top, but they're not really wing walkers like they used to do with the old flying jennies where they really walked on the wing. A wing walker nowadays with the FAA regulations is a sturdy backrest, lash yourself in with belts. You can turn inverted and you won't fall out. In fact, they do. Your legs might dangle off of where you're trying to, upside down. But the wing walkers, man, when you go up and do a hammerhead stall with a 450 Stearman and turn over like this and head right straight back down to do a nice hammerhead, which is up and do really, really slow, and you just give it rudder and turn around like that and come back down. When you're a wing walker, you're looking right at the grass, man, and you hope that dude knows when to pull that stick back because you get a good look at the ground.
So did you ever meet a wing walker?
Yeah, Jill Gersinski is a wing walker, but I never met her. I'll deal with her over the phone, and we call ourselves the last of the barnstormers because nowadays stuff is into radios and omnis and GPSs and you climb up and go. To me, flying is when your wheels are off the ground, you're flying. If you come to a tree, you go over it. That's what flying is to me, but it's just recreational. It's not.
Now be fair, Al. Any close calls?
Yeah, I guess.
Like on a hot day when you couldn't pull out of it?
Let's see. I guess it's closer than a close call, maybe. I met my wife and she lived on St. John's Lane, and the Bakers had big bean fields, hay fields, clover fields, alfalfa fields really, because they had cows and the milk dairy and all that sort of thing. So that was right where my wife lived, and I would land in Baker's Field, and my wife would come over and pick me up, and we'd have family reunions or whatever there, and picnics and such. And I had been landing in that field and got kind of used to it. Well, meanwhile, it came some nice, gentle, soft, warm rains, and that alfalfa growed up about a foot high, and it looked nice and level to me. But when I landed down in there with them little old wheels and that alfalfa started wrapping around them axles, that tail started coming up higher and higher and higher, and I was looking at the grass going through under, and pretty soon the old prop hit the ground and turned crossways, and the old thing dug in the ground on the spinner and went up on its back.
Oh,
But meanwhile, I was flying around with no cowling on it, because you can take the cowling off of a old Continental 65 horsepower, because it's got scoops on it to scoop air in to cool the engine. So there I am, just for the heck of it, flying around with the cowling off, look at the old motor sticking out there on the motor mount. And I had both doors on it. It had a door on the right and a door on the left. I had both doors off. And I had a bag of sugar corn there sitting on the seat, tied up, and the seat belt was on the sugar corn bag. It was 5 dozen or something in it. And when I turned upside down, the old sugar corn got loose from the seat belt. It went up on the ceiling, and I stayed in my seat belt, and I looked at my seat belt and said, well, at least that held. And I put one hand up on the ceiling like this and unbundled my seat belt and let myself down like that and rolled out on the wing and got out under the alfalfa and walked to the picnic.
Did your wife see that?
No, it was over the hill and a bit out of sight, but a quarter mile or something other.
Did you tell her about it?
Mount Hebron High School is there now.
Oh. Did you tell your wife how you?
Oh yeah, it was a blab of the picnic, really. And one guy says, "Did you break your fan when it turned over?"
So they have wooden prop or?
Wooden prop. Didn't break the prop.
Wow.
It was nice soft alfalfa.
Oh, and the ground was soft still.
No, they have soft alfalfa, and it stalled the prop, so it got sideways, and the spinner dug in the ground, and it turned right over on the spinner, not the prop.
The prop must have been, luckily been horizontal.
Yeah,
Boy.
I probably didn't have sense enough to shut it off, but it turned itself crossways and stalled. But a rock went through and made a hole in the wing, and one wing got the wing strut kinked, and it broke the carburetor off because it didn't have no cowling on it. It broke the carburetor off the bottom of the engine block. But when I came back to look at the airplane, a man there was in sight of the place on the road there, Frederick Road, I guess it was. He had went to Rutherford, bought another part for my carburetor, installed the carburetor, and had the airplane right side up and over near the road.
The wing?
No, the strut was bent and the hole was in the wing. So we pushed the strut up to where it was straight and tied 2 sticks on it and taped them. And when they cut the hay, I flew it back out.
When was this?
Let's see, it was before I was married, so it was about 1951-ish.
Did you remember an Ed Ballou?
Ed Ballou, I know the name, but don't place.
He had a Piper Cub down here near the Grady Manor, and he flew it out in the field. But over a period of time, the trees at the end of the runway had gotten a little higher than he thought they were. And when he took off, he actually set the thing down in the top of the tree, and they had to get a derrick to get it out.
Yeah, it must have been a forgiving, soft tree.
So just set it down there. It stood there for a couple of days, right just on the top of the tree. Just nested right up in there.
Well, you've been a delight to talk to, sir.
Thank you.
And I bet you if I just sat back here and started some more questions about aviation, you'd talk another hour, right?
Yeah, well, I had it up.
Fair and
Oh, yeah. So here you are, imagine this with me. You've been to the Howard County Fair a few times, right?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
So you're on the fairgrounds, you're walking around, and this young guy comes up to you and he says, aren't you a farmer? Haven't you been a farmer? And then he says to you, what could you tell me about getting into farming? Is it something I'm thinking about doing? What is your opinion about that, Al?
Like today or tomorrow, you mean? He wants to get into farming? Go get your head examined would be the first thing. And have you got a father that's ready to die that owns 1,000 acres, contiguous preferably, but maybe up and down the road, or go to Ohio or Indiana where farmers live at and they talk to each other about farming, and you're judged by how big a tractor you got, how big your combine is, and how many acres you got. You're not judged by whether you got a Mercedes or a Cadillac, or whether you're a realtor or whether you work for the government and all that sort of thing. You're a farmer and you got a big tractor and you got a big fuel tank and you sell a lot of corn and you got a corn dryer. Well, if you want a garden farm, well, then you're good here. If you can get enough spray to kill all the bugs and enough fertilizer to keep yourself going. But otherwise, think it over good. Like, for instance, years back when cage layers became, you had to be cage layer. You couldn't make it on the floor with chickens, or free range everybody was free range then. But a guy named Nicholson, or somebody down on Montgomery Road was trying to build a cage laying house, and the neighbors was opposing because they said it would stink and be noisy. So he went in with Tom, hired a lawyer, Tom Lloyd, to get him a permit, special permit, to put up this cage laying house. So I was into chickens, so Tom Lloyd was my lawyer to permit the airport. So he asked me about the cage laying house, what advice would I have for Mr. Nicholson, I'll call him, although it wasn't his real name, on Burger Road. And I said, my advice to him is let the neighbors win the hearing. In other words, don't build it.
Are you trying to tell us that maybe land is cheaper in the Midwest?
Yeah, but probably in the Midwest, the big mega farmers or whatever has crowded out a lot of the little guys, and a lot of little guys went broke in the Depression and lost their farms because of gains tax to be, when the old farmer man dies and the family has to raise 29% of the worth of the farm within a year or two, they can't do it. They got to sell the farm. So the farms have gone up to big old farms, really. So I guess farming around here is spots and rented, and you rent your farm out. If you got 100 acres, you rent your farm out to somebody that does 1,000 acres, and you go to work. I remember that when I was in the chicken business. I used to get poultry magazines, which tells you how to do your eggs and your chickens and all that sort of thing. And there was a cartoon in there that said, it was a little article really, how we managed to stay in the chicken business. My husband took a job in town.